One of the things that I encourage people to do is start having the conversations now. When we're 18, when we're 20, as opposed to 25, I get calls all the time with people saying, well, my dad's 85, and how do I get him to talk about doing an estate plan? And I say, well, you're 60. Have you done yours? Right? And so, and oftentimes the answer is no. I also encourage people to, again, you really should have your first plan at 18, but if not, let a catalyst like having children be one of the reasons why you care. Why? Because you want to make sure that you pick who takes care of your children if something happens to you. And for those people who don't have children, you need to be thoughtful about who gets to make the decisions about your health care if you can't. Right? Because, I've heard people say, when I'm dead, I don't care. But I encourage people to be thinking about, if I'm unable to make decisions for myself, who should make those decisions for me?
Welcome back to those who were on before, and you're tuned into the Foxworth Theory, and our special guest is attorney Aimee Griffin. Now, what are some great ways getting generational wealth on minds of people in our communities?
One of the things that I encourage people to do is start having the conversations now. When we're 18, when we're 20, as opposed to 25, I get calls all the time with people saying, well, my dad's 85, and how do I get him to talk about doing an estate plan? And I say, well, you're 60. Have you done yours? Right? And so, and oftentimes the answer is no. I also encourage people to, again, you really should have your first plan at 18, but if not, let a catalyst like having children be one of the reasons why you care. Why? Because you want to make sure that you pick who takes care of your children if something happens to you. And for those people who don't have children, you need to be thoughtful about who gets to make the decisions about your health care if you can't. Right? Because, I've heard people say, when I'm dead, I don't care. But I encourage people to be thinking about, if I'm unable to make decisions for myself, who should make those decisions for me, right? Who do we want to manage your checkbook? And we don't necessarily want the government all in it. There is a TV or Netflix show that talks about I Care a Lot, about this not wonderful attorney, but her job is, she's made this great life of taking care of people, I should say, serving as a guardian for people who didn't have their affairs in order. So because of their incapacity, the court identified someone else to do that. So someone is paid handsomely to take care of your finances and decision making because you didn't take those steps. So I encourage people that you should pick someone who does care about you. So that's a control that we can take. For those of us who are controlling, we can be thoughtful about who do we want to care for us? How do we want to guide the decision making? And how do we want to protect our assets going forward?
And that's why an executor for an estate is much better than a guardian. And what types of wealth are the best to have?
So funny. The best types of wealth are those which one can serve you, but not, it's like one of the things that we think about so often is having enough liquidity, so that it can manage your life, right? But having enough investments in appreciation so that it will continue to grow. We think about not just what you make, but what you keep. So we're being thoughtful about the capital gains tax. And then as well as one of the things that we are so mindful of in our community is we are charitable givers. We are philanthropists. We give to the church, we give to our schools, but we don't necessarily give it in a way that gives us our best reward or treatment. And so sometimes, I had this friend of mine who, dear friend, who there was a newspaper article. He has given $250,000 to Howard University. I called him up, first congratulating him, one, to have the capacity to do that, two, for having the heart to do that. And then I fussed at him because I knew that he didn't have the best strategic plan to do it. Not that I wanted to stop him from doing it, but I wanted to make sure that the way in which he gave, that he was giving like the appreciating assets that he would potentially have to pay capital gains on, and that it was in a way that, so we created a family foundation for him so that he could not only give, but be rewarded for giving. And that's where I always encourage people that we want to give back to our community in a strategic way. All the things that we do are great often if we have a plan to do it. We can't just be whimsical, but we need to be strategic in doing it. Right.
And I absolutely agree with you. I've seen it once too many. So what resources do you have to help people who want more information about estate planning?
So actually, that's one of the reasons why I created the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, was so that we could have a national network. So that but first and foremost, that estate planning is far more than just your wills and trusts, but it is the strategic collective planning using a financial advisor, using an insurance professional, a tax professional, as well as having realtors who understand what you're trying to do, because sometimes people don't have your values or your heart or your family in mind. So one of the things that's really important to me was creating a network of people who come together, who share your values and are committed to bridging the racial wealth gap, as well as not just making a dime off of you, but how to make a dime with you. It's like we can collectively, strategically create great wealth, not just as community members, but as with our professional network. I always want people to be thinking about how do we do that in a way that makes the most sense for us to have those longer term things, because we talk all the time about what does capital gains looks like. How do I continue to have my great, appreciating assets, but make sure that they don't pass with a tax on them. Right. So if we can have those collective conversations, because they're happening in other communities, we just need to have them in ours. And so as people say all the time, oh, the racial wealth gap is so significant that we don't need to have conversations about wealth in the Black community. I say, not only do we need to have them, we need to start having them now with people who don't reach the thresholds, but we can help groom them so that they can reach the thresholds where there is great wealth. Right. That, I say to most people, so when I'm working with them to create a trust and they have a child, I said, plan for your grandchildren. And I say, soon as their grandchild is born, get $1 million life insurance policy on that grandchild, so that when they can borrow from it to go pay for college, they can borrow from it for a down payment for the house. But when they pass away, you're seeding that trust for the next generation. So we need to be thinking about how do we strategically, consistently plan to have not just for me, not just for my kids, but for my children's children.
Preach on. I was starting to feel it. Now, if you have no assets, does this mean that generational wealth is not an option for you?
So no, exactly not. And the reality is, again, we need to start where we are, right? Because one, you have the asset of a life, which is significant. And if we don't plan for that life, not only do we not necessarily start at zero all over again, but we start further back from zero, right? And what happens so often, I'll never forget this was a distressing experience. I had a family that I was representing to complete a probate process, which means go through somebody had passed away. And so working through the court system because they didn't have a trust, but they had a will. And so the client that I was serving was the beneficiary. And I'm honest to God, this is the truth. The assets in the estate were a bank account that we turned out had a negative $627 and a house with a reverse mortgage,
Oh,
right? And so, and then their family members were gonna did sue them, right? And so I almost didn't want to charge her to represent her. Almost didn't want to charge her, but I had to charge her
of course.
because I sell my time, right? But
Yes.
it is be and that's what we do that's not planned for. Right. And so what we can do is you may not think you have a lot, but you never really know what you have when you've passed away. You don't know what that condition or position will be in. And I use as an example, unfortunately, George Floyd was murdered publicly. He didn't have an estate plan, but what we know is his public murder produced for his family millions of dollars.
Mhm.
Right? And he didn't have a plan. So what we know is there's going to be a number of people who are going to, and lawyers are highest in that list, who are going to benefit from that. So not that I ever begrudge lawyers their due, because we sell our time, we sell our brilliance, but I don't want the government to get more than their fair share. And we get to, in many cases, determine what that fair share is. So if we're thoughtful and planful, we can make the most for not just our family, but our community, for our charitable giving. But we can minimize that which we don't want to give to the government, right? Let's plan accordingly. Let's not let someone else determine for us, determine for us what we need to give. Let's take that power and control back.
Absolutely, absolutely. And would you do me a favor for our audience? Can you share a moment of inspiration that gives us an example of what happens when people successfully transfer wealth from one generation to another?
Oh, yes. One of the things that I love to see is when a mom will say, a single mom who's worked really hard for the benefit of her children and is able to get a house. Right.
Mhm.
And one such mom who worked a couple of jobs to be able to buy a house and sell and receive it. And she had multiple children. Right. And so when she passed away, she created a transfer on death deed to avoid probate and then put the house in a trust. And it's an income producing house. They could pull equity to seed other purchases of real property. So each of the children had that capacity she gave them the capacity to build wealth from the modest start that she had. So it's not about having to have a whole lot of money. It's about having to strategically plan with what you have.
And I greatly appreciate this. It was helpful to me. And I will say, save a time for me when I will be contacting you. This has been absolutely a remarkable, informative, and well needed conversation, counselor. And I say that because I know I've watched, and my heart has been torn out from
Mhm.
things that didn't happen. But
Mhm.
listening to you, and I'm sure my audience is doing the same, has really changed things. So I would like to thank you very much, Aimee Griffin. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today on the Foxworth Theory, which airs every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thank you again for joining the Foxworth Theory, and travel safely and stay well.
Thank you so much for having me.